Okay, because Laura's codependent, she's making me do therapy, which I am having to pay a bunch of money for. She's paying some of it, but I'm paying some of it too. So, anyway, this is it.
Okay, so why don't you tell me a little about why you decided to do this?
Well, it was on Laura's insistence because it's a rocky, stormy relationship, and she feels she's codependent. And reading all these books, it seems like no one's not codependent.
Mm-hmm.
And I was raised by alcoholic parents and went through a lot of trauma and have done a lot of work over the years. But like she was saying yesterday, it's like the musical scales. You do the work, but then you get to another place and you realize that you're just on another plateau. So there's always more work to be done.
Yeah, because our perspective keeps changing.
Right.
As we grow and as we get a bigger perspective.
Right.
So yeah, and it's really basically we had to we had to grow up and start being adults that were being trained on how to do that.
Yeah.
And so and this childhood stuff it was really impetuous, but we never really understood how much, I don't think, for most of us. And so what's so important is to really understand, start understanding how that childhood stuff has been impacting our lives, so that we can start changing and stop allowing that to happen.
Right.
So what I like to do when I start off is just start off talking about the dynamics of this stuff and where it came from and how it works. Because what's so important is for you to be able to see your own internal process more clearly, so that you can intervene and stop any stuff that's not working for you and change anything that's not working for you.
Okay.
So because what happens with codependency is we end up feeling like the victim of our own thoughts and our own feelings, and like our own worst enemy. And what we want to do is learn how to be our own best friend.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing that's really important the first thing that's really important to start realizing has to do with the natural child developmental process. Because the part of a child's brain that understands cause, effect, and logic and abstract concepts like time doesn't fully develop until around 7 years old.
Okay.
That's when my grandson, a couple months after his 7th birthday, all of a sudden on the way to school one day, all of a sudden he says, "How does Santa Claus get to every house in the world in one night?"
Yeah.
He's starting to understand logic. But prior to 7, children are egocentric and magical thinking.
Right.
And so when we're little kids, our parents are our higher powers. They're the goddess in our life, and we have no realistic perspective of them whatsoever. When we're small, when we're 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, we're not capable of processed thought. We're not capable of saying to ourselves, "Wow, Mom must be having a really bad day. That's why she's yelling at me." We just know Mom's yelling at us. Mm-hmm. And so whatever it happens, whatever kind of any kind of abuse or deprivation, any lack of bonding, anything in the environment that's uncomfortable, fighting, anxiety, alcoholism, stress, depression, whatever's going on in the environment, we end up internalizing that and feeling like it's our fault because we're the center of the universe as far as we know. Uh-huh. And so that's where the core of the disease comes from. It's what I call toxic shame. And the difference between guilt and shame, in my definition, is that guilt is about behavior. I did something wrong, I made a mistake. Shame is about our being. Something's wrong with me. I'm a mistake. It's this place really deep down inside where we feel somehow dysfunctional and unlovable and unworthy because our parents were wounded and didn't know how to love themselves or be emotionally healthy. And that feeling that there's something wrong with me is the foundation that we built our relationship with ourselves on. So we were in trouble early, you know. And then what happens is our ego, which is the part of our being whose job it is to help us survive, adapts an emotional and behavioral defense system to try to control our behavior and emotions so we fit into the dysfunctional family and the rules of our particular dysfunctional family. Because one of a child's jobs is to manipulate its environment to survive. You know, children are born manipulative, and a child will do whatever works. You know, throwing temper tantrums works, if crying works, if being the good child it works, if trying to be invisible is what works best, a child will adapt to this environment. And the neurological researchers nowadays actually say that the neural pathways in our brain that relate to relating to other people are pretty well set by the time we're 4 or 5 years old.
Huh.
How scary is that?
Yeah, right.
Our basic relationship patterns are set by the time we're about 5 years old.
Huh.
And the problem is we never get taught how to change those neural pathways.
Huh.
You know, one of the things I talk about in my book, I don't know if you've noticed it, but I talk about how I believe that as civilization made more progress and got more, you know, distanced itself more from nature and having respect for nature and natural laws, it got more dysfunctional, you know, in terms of the individual human beings' feelings of importance and belonging. And that some of the Aboriginal societies had healthier cultures in a lot of ways because they had respect for nature and natural law. You know, like the Native Americans, when children reach adolescence, they had training and initiation rites to teach them how to be adults.
Yeah.
We got sent to junior high school.
Yeah, right.
And tortured, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
any one of the world is such a mess, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where we learned how to be adults.
Right.
So it's really screwed up, you know. But the, you know, the ego isn't a negative thing in and of itself. It just got programmed really badly.
Uh-huh.
And that negative programming started with fairy tales that taught us that when we meet our prince or princess, we're going to live happily ever after, right?
Uh-huh.
Which, of course, is not the way it works, you know? And we got, you know, the message that I used to call it the frog princess syndrome. I felt like an ugly frog, and I had to have a princess in my life to make me a prince. Well, as long as I think I have to have that other in my life for me to be okay, then what I ended up doing is trying to control that other person.
Huh.
And that's not love. You know, trying to control somebody, that's not love.
Right.
And, of course, the fairy tales were followed up by the books and the movies and the songs that taught us that what romantic love is that I can't smile without you, I can't live without you, you are my everything.
Yeah.
And that's not love either.
Yeah.
You know, that's an addiction. That's making the other person our drug of choice or our higher power.
Yeah.
And so we were really set up by our childhood programming to not know how to do romantic relationships in a healthy way. Mm-hmm. To expect them to be something they're not. You know? But we were set up in terms of not just the romantic relationship, but for life itself by those fairy tales, because we got the message there was a destination to reach. You know, and as an adult, if somebody asks you if you could live happily ever after, you'd say, oh, no, of course not. That's fairy tale stuff. Yeah. But we feel like there's some place to get to. When I get there, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
You know, when I get the money or the relationship or the car or the house or whatever it is, you know.
Yeah.
And basically it comes down to is we don't feel comfortable here in our own skins where we're at. And we think we have to get there to be okay. And it doesn't work. You know, because even if we get there, it's not going to make us feel the way we thought it was going to make us feel.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to fill a hole inside of us with something from the outside.
Right.
Yeah. And it doesn't work, you know. I realized I've been living my life as if it were a dress rehearsal for when my life's really going to start, you know.
Uh-huh.
Down the road a piece when I get the relationship or the money or whatever it is, you know.
Yeah.
And life isn't about reaching destinations. Life's a journey We want to be able to enjoy the journey more and be more present for the journey instead of feeling like we're not going to be okay until.
Yeah.
Until we get there. So that's one of the basic dynamics of codependency, is what I call destination thinking.
Yeah.
Thinking we're not going to be okay until. So then on top of that, we got programmed to look outside for our self-definition and self-worth, to people and things, money, property, and prestige, accomplishments, popularity, relationships. And also to external manifestations of our own being, like looks and talent and intelligence. And all those outside and external things are subject to change. When we're basing how we feel about ourselves on something outside or external that's subject to change, we're in trouble because our whole world will fall apart. I believe that that we got programmed to look at those things to feel good about ourselves, and it's a setup. It's what it can accurately be described as worshiping false gods. You're too attached to the illusion.
Right.
And what I learned to do is draw a boundary, make a distinction for myself between what I call ego strength and true self-worth. And the ego strength is about the outside or external things, and there's nothing wrong with any of them. There's nothing wrong with being good-looking or smart or rich or successful. It's when we think that is what gives us worth that we're being codependent. It's outer or external dependence to feel good about ourselves.
Uh-huh.
And it's like I said, it's a setup, because those things are always subject to change.
Right.
And what I believe is that our true worth comes from our spiritual essence. That we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We're connected to the source. The force is with us. We're children of the God is part of the Great Spirit, however one wants to say it. But we have worth because we're connected to the oneness of everything, not because of anything temporary outside of us. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Do you have any religious programming growing up?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say religious, spiritual.
Spiritual?
Yeah.
But that we could, basically what happened is, I believe that the truth is that all human beings have inherent worth because we're connected to that oneness of everything.
Right.
And we got taught exactly 180 degrees the opposite. We got taught to look outside for our self-definition and self-worth, to the outside or external things.
Yeah.
And so it's really powerful programming that we got growing up, and our conditioning. And it's real important for us to be able to recognize that programming and to start countering that old programming. And one of the things that makes this so complicated is that we got taught a really screwed up relationship with our own feelings, because we grew up in emotionally dishonest, dysfunctional cultures with emotionally crippled parents.
Yeah.
And so we got a really messed up relationship with our own emotions, and our emotions are actually what tell us who we are. The ones that are coming from our heart and soul, but there's also emotional reactions we have that aren't telling us the truth. And because when we're reacting to old wounds, when we're reacting to childhood wounds, or those emotional buttons that we have, when one of those emotional buttons gets pushed, what we're feeling is what the child felt then, not what's appropriate for an adult of our age and knowledge and experience to feel in this situation today. But it feels like our total reality. When we have one of those reactions, it feels like our total truth. And so it's real important to start recognizing that feelings are real. They're actual energy that manifests in our body, but they're not necessarily fact or truth. Because when we're reacting to an old wound, we're not being present now. We're reacting out of the past, out of the old wounds, not out of our present day consciousness. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so part of what's so important is to start counter-programming to that feeling, what it feels like. And there's some really useful sayings in 12-step recovery, and a couple of them that apply here are fake it till you make it, or act if I had to start acting as if I was unconditionally loved, even though it didn't feel like it.
Yeah.
Start acting as if there was a loving higher power, even though it felt like God was a sadistic asshole.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I had to start countering that programming, so I wasn't letting those old feelings define my life for me anymore. Mm-hmm. And so we want to be able to start recognizing that our worth doesn't come from that outside stuff. We have inherent worth, and start being able to counter program to what it feels like when we have those reactions. So not only were we taught to look outside for our worth, but we were also taught to do it in comparison. That you had worth if you got better grades than, if you're better looking than, if you're a better athlete than, if you had a better car than, whatever. Growing up in codependent cultures, what we learned is that self-worth is a competitive issue, which means in order to feel good about myself, I have to have other people I look down on. Huh. And conversely, there's always somebody to look up to feel like I'm not there yet. Huh. So here still isn't okay, but at least it's better than them. Huh. I'm not going to be okay till I get there. I mean, what a crappy way to live.
Yeah.
It's no wonder we don't love our neighbors ourselves. We didn't get taught how to love ourselves.
Yeah.
And basically what happened is our egos got programmed to relate to life from fear, shame, and scarcity. Because that's what our parents relate to life from. Huh. And this codependent defense system that our ego adapted, the enforcer for the ego in this defense system is what I call the critical parent voice. And this is some programming in our own mind that is trying, that's part of this defense system that's trying to control our behavior and emotions, and it's using the same tools on us that were used on us, which is fear and shame and guilt. Huh. And it's doing it according to the rules we learned in childhood. And basically what we learned in childhood is that life is a test that you can fail, and you can fail it by doing it wrong. Uh-huh. Because we grew up in black and white society where right is what you should do and wrong is bad and shameful. And it's important to recognize that traditional family values in the dominant culture is patriarchal supremacy with children and women treated like property. Uh-huh. There wasn't even such a thing as healthy parenting class until about 25 years ago or so. Yeah. Children weren't considered individuals with rights. A lot of us had things done to us in childhood that our parents would go to jail for today. Yeah. Because it was about, children should be seen and not heard, the raw and spoil the child, and all that crap. Yeah. So a lot of us got the message it wasn't okay to be a kid. Yeah. It's like one of the kids' jobs is to walk the environment and touch things and taste things and get into things. Yeah. And a lot of us got picked for that. Yeah. We got the message that it was shameful and bad to mistakes, to spill the milk or whatever. Yeah. Shameful and bad. It was shameful and bad to do anything to upset our parents. Yeah. That it was shameful and bad, emotional. Including it wasn't okay to be too happy. Sometimes we got punished for being exuberant in the library or church or whatever, wrong place, wrong time, Yeah. And for most of us, the parents taught us very clearly it was not okay to set boundaries with them. Yeah. They didn't want to hear it. Yeah. It was their way or the highway, Yeah. And we also, a lot of us got the message that it wasn't okay to be so. So basically, the rules the critical parent voice is going by is that life is a test that you can fail, and you can fail it by being an imperfect human being. So it's shaming us for being imperfect. At the same time, it's caused us to be really terrified of doing it wrong and obsessively try to figure out how to do it right. And it's really a crappy way to live. Yeah, yeah. and on top of it, most of us got taught to keep up appearances and keep the secrets and wear masks. Mm. Because our parents were more concerned usually about what the neighbors thought about them because of our behavior than they were about what was causing our behavior. Uh-huh. They wanted us to do good so they looked good. And they couldn't actually see us as separate individuals. they saw us as extensions of them. They projected their hopes and dreams and their fears and insecurities and their shame and guilt on us. And they didn't, the way they treated us actually wasn't personal.
Yeah.
It wasn't about who we are because they couldn't see who we are,
Yeah.
because they couldn't see who they are. And so it was real, it's real important to recognize that, that keeping up appearances thing, I until I started doing this work, I felt like my deepest thoughts and feelings were shameful and bad, and I needed to keep them hidden from other people. But then when I felt bad, I'd compare how I felt inside to how other people look on the outside and think they knew something I didn't know.
Huh.
Look at that happy couple. How come I can't do a relationship?
Yeah.
But what I did realize is they're all keeping up appearances too.
Huh.
That everybody got taught to be emotionally dishonest and manipulative in childhood. And so it's like, I don't know if you remember, there's an old song about the games people play, never saying what they mean, never meaning what they say.
Yeah.
That's the way society works. People don't talk about what's real. They gossip and talk about politics and sports and whatever, but they don't talk about what's going on inside of them because they don't know.
Right.
And so, we, when we were small, we had to focus on our parents because they were the big people. We were the little people. They had life and death powers for us. We had to pay attention to them, try to read them to try to get our needs met and keep ourselves safe, to survive. And for some of us, if we came from an alcoholic home or a home with physical violence or something, mental illness, we became like hyper vigilant in trying to read them so we could figure out how to take care of ourselves. Because some of us didn't know if it was going to be safe to walk in the house after school.
Yeah.
Because we didn't know what was going on there.
Yeah.
And so we became hyper vigilant, focused on them. We went to school, we focused on them, tried to figure out how to fit in there. And we grew up focusing outside, trying to figure out, how to get our needs met and how to survive. And as long as we were focusing outside, but we couldn't see ourselves clearly because we were seeing ourselves through this filter of shame and judgment for being imperfect. And as long as we weren't seeing ourselves clearly, we weren't seeing other people clearly, we weren't seeing life clearly.
Uh-huh.
And so what we need to do, in order to change our relationship with anything, we need to change our perspective of it. And I don't know if you've read my book where I talk about there's an old joke about three blind men describing an elephant by touch.
Yeah.
Touching three different parts of the elephant and describing three completely different things.
Right.
And like I say in my book, each one is speaking his own truth. They just have a lousy perspective.
Right.
And that's what we have. That's what codependency basically is we have a lousy perspective of who we are and what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And so in order to change our relationship with ourselves, we need to change our perspective of ourselves. So the key step, the key technique in doing that is to develop a detached, objective observer perspective or witness perspective. Now, part of the problem is we already have a witness perspective, but it's a critical parent voice.
Uh-huh.
That's, the negative play-by-play announcer in our life, calling us stupid and whatever it's calling us,
Uh-huh.
And I used to just think that's the way I thought. I didn't know everybody had a critical parent voice. I thought that was just me that thought that way.
Uh-huh.
And it was so important for me to realize that that's not part of my true self. That's not part of who I truly am. That's conditioned programming. That's environmental from childhood. And that it's not telling me the truth, and I don't have to, I can learn not to give it up. I can learn not to listen to it. It was real important for me to start recognizing that because it was always so nasty to me, a critical parent. And one of the things I always ask people when I'm start talking about the observer perspective is, have you ever done any Eastern meditation practices?
I do a lot of Native American stuff.
Okay, because the reason I asked about the Eastern practices is because they teach an observer perspective, but passive observer, where you observe your thoughts and your feelings, but you don't actually change anything.
Uh-huh.
And some people actually use meditation as a form of antidepressant to stay dissociated with their feelings.
Huh.
And that's not what we want, because things don't go away if we don't deal with them.
Huh.
It's like there's some new age kind of things where they talk about, just be here now and forget about the past and forget about your pain body or whatever, crap they're saying.
Yeah.
And that's a bunch of bull. We can't do that.
Yeah.
It's like one of the things that one of the things I said here is the only reason to do inner child healing is if you're going to interact with other human beings.
Yeah.
Because if you interact with other human beings, they're going to push your buttons.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is we have these buttons that can be pushed, these emotions. We have these basic wounds around fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of betrayal, not feeling like being seen or heard or respected, feeling discounted and invalidated. And when those buttons get pushed, these really strong reactions, and then what happens is the critical parent voice comes in and judges and shames us for the reactions or else tries to blame them all on somebody else. And so the basically what we've had for most of our life is just the only way we knew how we've had this critical parent and these wounded inner children. So we've been doing inner child abuse for most of our life. And so it's so important to develop this observer. This observer becomes the empowered adult part of us that is capable of going in and setting boundaries of the critical parent voice and starting to develop a loving, compassionate relationship with the inner child wounds and become the loving parent to our own emotional wounds. And a part of a parent's job is to set boundaries. It's a child's job to test the boundaries, but the boundaries need to be loving and consistent. When boundaries are inconsistent, children feel really insecure and unsafe because they don't know what the rules are.
Yeah.
If you came out of an alcoholic family, then you never knew what the rules were because they changed over time, and that makes it really insecure and feel unsafe. And so this observer, and it's like I started to say about this, they teach a passive observer in the meditation practice. This observer that I'm talking about is a proactive intervening observer. We actually go in and start changing the ego programming. We can actually, change the neural pathways in our brain doing this work. So it's really powerful work.
Huh.
And the emotional wounds that we have, the reactions we have, because of growing up in a black and white society, we tend to see things as black and white, as either or, right or wrong. Uh-huh. And we react to extremes. We underreact or we overreact. One real common pattern is we underreact, stuff it down, underreact, until we build up so much pressure that then we explode and we overreact. Uh-huh. Then we feel ashamed and crazy, and we go back to underreacting again. Huh. And it's like doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. It's basically the definition of insanity.
Yeah.
And on one level, what codependency is about having been programmed and conditioned to live the serenity prayer backwards.
Yeah.
You're familiar with the serenity prayer, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And we basically got the message that we should be in control of things we can't control.
Right.
Like other people in life,
Yeah.
And we did not get taught any effective way of taking control of the things we can control because we've been trying to control our own internal process with fear and shame and guilt. And when we're shaming ourselves, eventually what happens is that rebel in us rebels against that. Uh-huh. And that's when we do what I call in my book, The Battle Cry of Codependency, which is I'll show you, I'll get me.
Yeah.
The rebel in us actually got aligned with the addictions and the self-destructive behavior because it was reacting to the shame. So it's really nasty stuff.
Yeah.
So we need to retrain the rebel in us, to fight on the side of the healthy stuff instead of on the side of the addictions. But this observer perspective, like I said, it becomes the empowered adult part of us. And as long as we're reacting, like I said, we underreact or overreact, we blame it all on ourselves or blame it all on somebody else, we stay in a relationship that's not working, I think we're never ever going to be in a relationship again.
Yeah.
And as long as we're reacting, we're not making conscious choices. We're just reacting. It's like if somebody's not in a relationship because they've been hurt in relationships and they don't know how to do relationships, that's not a choice, that's a reaction.
Yeah.
It's like in my book, I say, the example I use is, if you never knew how to say no, then you never really said yes.
Yeah.
If you didn't know how to say no, then you're saying yes to things you don't want to do, and you end up feeling